property values will probably go down. People are going to have property split right down the middle. When that goes down, that affects the taxes, the money that the community has to be able to raise our children, pay streets, take care of the community the way that it needs. The gross sales from county will also be affected because farmers are going to have difficulty crossing the rail line to take care of their products that they're growing and their cattle that they're working with. And lastly, it's going to be the project insurance. That's all those Texas. That's what happens when the deal goes bad. What happens when the schedule starts getting stretched out and they need more money? Who's going to come to it? Are they going to send it back to Japan and say, "Oh, send us more money"? Or are they going to start trying to strangle each one of us and get a few more bucks out of what we do? So those are just some of the issues that Marty was referring to in the impact statement that we've already looked at and presented a 14-page document we're having circulated on the state representatives and local members, anyone official that we can actually get it to. As he stated, we tried to make it very objective. That was our purpose going in. And when we got done with it, we couldn't find anything positive that came out of the citizens of Ellis County. So, what actions have we been taking as Texas Concerned Citizens? We are a nonprofit corporation who volunteers doing this, but we've been doing an awful lot of research in support of our representatives and the legal environment and our community leaders. We found a little thing called the Regional Planning Commission. It's section 391 of the Texas Code. And we're fortunate tonight, the Kyle here, he has a lot of experience with 391. He actually sits on one today. And so we're taking his ring. In this business of finding that plagiarism is not bad. If you find something that works, duplicate it. So that's what we have done. There's actually 8 in the state of Texas right now. None of them in North Texas. So it became an opportunity for us. And why it was so important is because it has language that says shall. All state agencies shall coordinate with this commission. That makes it have some teeth. It's a government body recognized by the Secretary of State and cannot get things that when you ask a question they have to answer. So these questions are drawn up with economic impacts and what are some of the criteria they're using. We now have the ability to go forward and request freedom of information. And even without freedom of information, as one government agency to another, disclose what the criteria is that you've been using. We took this and brought it to the attention of the city councils in Palmer, Ennis, and Ferris, and I want to tell you that your leaders in this community have stood up, and they're doing the best jobs that they can in trying to represent their constituents in fighting this particular activity. Commissioners, we have present here tonight for Ellis County have already passed a resolution recognizing that this community, our county, is in opposition to high-speed rail. When we presented this to the cities of Palmer and Ennis, they jumped on it immediately, and we're very pleased to say that as of last night, Palmer and Ennis have both passed the resolution to form the 391 Regional Planning Commission. The requirement is a minimum of 2. So that requirement has already been met, and your community is now putting together the team and leaders to go forward and start requesting that information and start protecting your community. Side benefit of the 391 is it also helps with the long-term economic development of your community. Because anything that happens within the geographic area of this commission, and it represents the area from Palmer tonight to Ennis. There will be also inviting school districts. School districts can join that in their geographical footprint. It's basically all of the eastern half of Ellis County. We presented to Paris last night in their city council, and their city council also said they wanted on the next committee meeting, which is 2 weeks, and they're going to vote for it. And I'm cautiously optimistic that it's going to pass. So this will be the first 391 south of us, so we all share in these goals. So you'll hear more about 391s in the press and what's been happening. In other words, the war is not over. It has not been lost. Now, Kyle and I were talking earlier tonight, and we recognize that there probably isn't just one single bullet as a silver bullet to kill this project. So we're going to have to work on a multi-dimensional front. And that's what we're doing. So we need your participation. We need you to be involved, to call your representatives. John Ray has already signed and is working on legislation to go forward in opposition to this. Brian Burnwell, our state senator, has also signed against this high-speed rail activity. So they need to know that we're standing behind them and supporting them. And I think this is what God is going to come to. I have one chart. I think we got it next. For those that are wondering, on this chart, you see the red circles are the cities of Ferris, Palmer, and Ennis. And when you add the school districts in there, you can see that that blue covers the entire eastern half of Ellis County. And what makes this so important is that today, Ellis County, Kaufman County, Johnson County have one representative on the executive council for the North Central Texas COP. There's 13 members. We only have one voice. When you look at their transportation committee, which this goes through, there are 44 members. We have one member on that 44. So we're going from a position of having 1 in 44, 1 in 13 type vote, to having 1 in 1 because they shall coordinate with this commission. So that's the big thing, and it's covered by footprint. Our main focus to start with is the eastern half of Ellis County, and now we'll start working on the western half of Ellis County. And why is it important? Because Ellis County has both railroads going through it, both trains on the western front and on the eastern front of the Berlin walls. We use a lot in our description about it. So this is impacting everyone in this community, and if we are successful in going forward and delaying this project, and where it's not hurting the community and our social environment that we have, if we are successful, Texas is successful. This is the kingpin. This county is very important, and that's what you're going to hear more about from God. This is why it's important for us to stand up and make that matter. So, with all of that, I'm going to go back to the original presentation. You need to look over yours. I'm going to let you know also that we're going to have a question and answer session after Kyle gets through with his. So, Kyle's going to make his presentation, and then we'll have a question and answer session. We do have maybe Marty, can we move that box a little bit further to the back so that if you'd like to have a question, we'll certainly answer it. Raise your hand, but if you'd like to write one for the box, we'll be okay. So Kyle Workman is the Texas Rail, strictly knowledgeable. My first time meeting, and I'm extremely impressed. I'm glad to say that we're partners in the fight against the high-speed rail.
Thank you all very much for coming tonight. Bear with me, I'm gonna kind of run through our little presentation here, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail on some of the issues, and then I will be available to answer questions both in a large group session and then individually after the presentation. So. Okay. All right, we've already taken care of part of that. One of the things that I do want to make clear, again, my name is Kyle Workman. I'm with Texans Against High-Speed Rail. I'm a volunteer who got involved in this project right after it was sort of announced, if you can call it that, back in late October, early November, and started developing a little website called No Texas HSR. You may have seen it. And then here recently was approached to join this entity, Texans Against High-Speed Rail, as the president. So I've been running up and down the region here, making presentations about our statewide efforts as it relates to the opposition of this project. Here with me as well is my communications director, Desi Porter, and then my wife, who has worked our community outreach director as well. We're glad, we're really extremely glad to be here. I'm technology challenged apparently, you know. Anyway. I apologize. I messed it up. It happens. Obviously, I'm not qualified to run this thing. It needs some help. Which button is it? The back side. He said the bottom button, so it's really not my fault for this one. Okay, so let's talk about the reality of HSR in Texas. Y'all may have heard there's been quite a bit of traction at the federal level. President Obama in 2009, as part of the American Recovery Act and Reinvestment Act, appropriated $12 billion to study high-speed intercity passenger rail within the United States. With a goal in mind of 14,000 miles of this track all over the state, all over the nation. So there's a little map out. I didn't bring a copy of it, but we can point you in that direction if you're so inclined. The other thing that's important is TxDOT is constantly seeking new funds for these rail projects. They make these grant applications through the Federal Railroad Administration, and then they get these grants to study these different rails. And their attitude is, if we study these rails, then we can get them built by some private entity later. They recognize that there's no political will nor to spend federal or state tax money on it, at least not yet. So one of the things that you'll see on our website to check it out is part of our strategy is to change the culture within TxDOT away from rail and towards roads. So all of us are familiar with Prop 1. Most of us voted for that. And we all wanted more roads. We want our tax money, our gas tax money to go to roads, not to rail. One of the things that's important to note, we have several different people, several different types of people that come to us. The people that believe that this project is so pie in the sky, it'll never happen. It's just a waste of time, money, and effort to try to afford it. And then you have the other side as well, it's a done deal, and then we can do that. And what we're going to try to do tonight is to bring everybody back into what I call kind of the reality of high-speed rail. GCR has reportedly spent $40 million on this project so far. That's real money. That's not guesswork. That is something that they are putting a lot of their funds into studying this project, and they intend to go forward with it. So anybody that tells you, well, it'll never happen, they're spending a lot of money. It's really hard for me to imagine them doing that just because they want to. The other thing to keep in mind is this is not a done deal. Texas Central Rail has at least 3 lobbyists, is what we understand, on retainer at the Capitol. We have one, we'll talk about that in a minute. And also, their eminent domain authority has not been recognized by TxDOT. As we were talking about earlier, this federal designation from the Surface Transportation Board that talks about railroad, it basically gives them railroad status, sends them back down to the state to execute any eminent domain through the laws of the state of Texas. So one of the things we're doing is working to confine those laws in such a way that will be beneficial to us citizens. There's a significant outcry between all of the areas. One of our main goals is to try to connect all of those areas from here to Montgomery County and everywhere in between. I'm from Leon County. I'm a transplant there, moved actually out of Travis County where they just passed recently a rail project that I thought was the dumbest thing on the planet. Tried to move out of that type of work, or that type of ideas, and sure enough, all of them were wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Don't move where I'm at. Anyway, so TCR does not reportedly have the funds lined up. So again, that's another one of the things that we're trying to do. If we increase their costs, increase their uncertainty, we will see them they'll begin to struggle with the funds. And they have to get $10 to $12 million. We all know about California, how it started at 10 and ended up at 68. So I'm betting that they end up a little bit closer to 30 to 40 probably. So it's going to be a lot of money they outlays. So we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to slow that down. All right, I'm going to run through real quick the 4 P's, I call them: the players, the project, the problem, and the plans. Okay. The players, y'all seen some of these things. You know about Texas Central Railway. You know that they are just the promoter. They're not the owner of the project. They will have another entity, Texas Central Partners, that they've recently just declared as is going to be the owner, operator, and developer. It remains to be seen how that's going to finally structure. We'll see. We know that the Japan Central Railway will be providing the trains and what they call a system life commitment. In other words, they're going to manage the system through the life of the project, or through the life of the system over 50 years or whatever. The Japan Bank for International Cooperation is where they declared that they're going to get their money from. That is an import-export bank that basically invests in some of these type of projects in other parts of the world. Of course, you know about the Federal Railroad Administration, TxDOT is a public agency, and then the Surface Transportation Board. I mentioned that earlier. They can make a submission to the Surface Transportation Board for the Certificate of Necessity and Convenience. That gives them the status of railroad. They don't have to do that. And I think it's important to note that it may be problematic for them to do that. Recently, y'all may have heard, there was a very similar project in southern Florida. It was within the state lines of Florida. In order for the Surface Transportation Board to get involved, they have to prove that it's going to be part of the overall rail network. In other words, it has to be connected on both ends to some other rail project. It can't be connected to buses or anything else. So that may be a little bit problematic for them. So even if they decide to make that, there's no guarantee that they will actually get jurisdiction from the Surface Transportation Board. And I've spoken with them, the Surface Transportation Board, and I actually have the case law that I'll be happy to share if anybody's interested. As you know about the project, 240-mile high-speed line, dedicated north and southbound tracks. A portion of it will be elevated. We're pretty certain that elevated portion is going to be in the urban areas where the land is a little bit more expensive. But it's going to be large down embankments. Many of y'all headed south, and if you've driven down Highway 39, for example, or along any of the freight rail tracks, you'll know that whenever there's a grade variation, in order for that track to stay level, they have to build it up. And so it's important to remember when they say at grade, if you're looking at your back pasture and you're seeing what you're thinking in your mind that train's going to be on the ground, and that's not the way it's going to be. It's probably going to be elevated on some kind of a berm or embankment. And then no at-grade crossings. That just means there won't be any, crossing lines and arms and all that stuff. It's going to be high fence, just like you talked about. Where we're from, Leon County, one of the things that we struggle with is keeping fences that can keep hogs out. And so I've asked that question. I've asked TCR, well, how are you guys going to keep the hogs out? It's a simple question. They don't have nothing. What? Is there a fence? We don't. One of the things that we'd like to always bring up also is the security of this particular project. If you study about high-speed rail in the world, you'll know that 2/3 of the attacks on high-speed rail from a security perspective, a terrorist perspective, happen actually on the track, not actually on the train. So they're talking about this, we're going to have reduced TSA screening. Okay, that's all fine. We don't really think that's going to end up being that way. But who's going to be responsible for managing the security of these tracks? I mean, is it going to be my county sheriff? Is it going to be your county sheriff? If so, do we have the resources to do that? Particularly if you figure in the loss of tax revenue that'll be undoubtedly taking place as a result of this. Another key component, it's going to be a new right-of-way. If you read their language very carefully, it'll say along existing corridors to minimize landowner impact. Well, okay, but most of those other corridors are not straight enough for them. We know that. We also know that they're going to be taking their own greenfield, if you will, brand new land. Okay, so even if they're running down a power line on their piece of property, they're not going to be running into easement. It'll be a new easement. And also keep in mind is the stations are only slated currently for Dallas and Houston. They have to do that because they have to compete with the airline. The only way they can do that is say it's 90 minutes from one end to the other. If they add a stop in the middle, then they will lose the name of it. Okay, so some of the routes that are still being reviewed by the FOA, y'all may have heard that recently they came out and said, oh, we don't want to use the BNSF route because of whatever reason. Well, right there after the FOA came out and said, yeah, we appreciate that TCR, but we're the ones that make that decision, so thank you for your input. So it's important to note that all of these routes are still under review. Now, they're focusing on those two, the BNSF, the utility corridor. The other thing to keep in mind is that those are very schematic in nature. And what I mean by that is that those lines on paper could move significantly around a wetland, around a structure, around a landowner that wants more money for their land. Okay, so when you see that line on paper, if you're 20 miles to the west or 10 miles to the west, don't think you're in the clear. Okay, because those final routes have not been determined, and they will not be determined until the environmental impact study is being completed. Ellis County, y'all may have seen this map before. I think the utility corridor is in green, and the BNSF track is in blue. Again, those curves are not sweeping enough for their lines, so these will change ultimately. Go. There it is. All right, the problems. Private property rights trampled, loss of property values. One thing you will probably know is that your property values have already dropped. Okay, and the reason for that is that if you went to sell your property today and you're anywhere near one of those lines, you're going to have to disclose that as part of your sale process. We talked to tax appraisers up and down the line, and they recognize that there is already a loss of our property value as a result of this project, and it'll only get worse. The use of eminent domain for a private company who is the sole beneficiary. We've talked about, talked about this all over the place. The reality of it is, they have to come up with this common carrier status. But unlike a power line or a pipeline where we can continue to use our land for its intended purpose, in most cases, not all, most cases, this is as he mentioned, it is a Berlin Wall. We call it the Great Wall of Japan. And it's going to basically separate not only this county, but every county between here and Texas. If you look at the map, for the most part, it cuts through the heart of all of those counties in the middle. One of the things I like to point out is if they're going to borrow the money and they're going to use our land for collateral, who's going to hold that collateral when it falls, when it fails? So I think that's strategic. If I'm them, I would want the collateral to be that land so that when they do fail, us, the landowners, we would go to the state and say, man, give me my land back. Y'all got to build this out so it doesn't go to Japan. Right? So keep in mind that they're going to be borrowing these funds, and our land will be the collateral. We know, and I think we all instinctively know this, that there's an inevitable financial collapse that's going to come with this. The ridership's not there. It will not be there. I'm not planning on giving up my truck, and I don't think anybody in this room is planning on it either. But they think they're projecting some unrealistic amount of ridership. For example, it's our understanding that there's 1.5 million plane flights, or people that fly between Houston and Dallas every year. There's 18 million passenger vehicles. For those of y'all who drive on 45, you know that most of those passenger vehicles, quote unquote, are really cargo trucks. And so when you really get down to it, there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 8 million people that travel between Dallas and Houston on a real passenger basis. Well, their ridership study basically saying that they're going to have about 5 million of those people come off of the road and off without the airline. So they have to get all the airline and half the people off the road to ride the train in properly. We all know that that's not going to happen. So we know that at the end of the day, there's going to be an inevitable financial collapse, and likely state or federal take over. One of the things I also like to point here under the light of taxpayer subsidies, there's grants, there's bonds, there's loans that they can get from the federal government. But the most important taxpayer subsidy is in that domain. To use the power of the government to reduce your costs is no different than getting the money directly from the state. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to harp on that because people don't necessarily associate those two together, but they truly are. And the fact that they're going to use that eminent domain is a taxpayer subsidy by definition. All right. So the plan. We basically see there being a three-pronged plan. One, the grassroots efforts. We think all of these, and by the way, all of these are very important to us and to the overall plan. The grassroots plan includes letter writing, phone calls, visiting the Capitol, talking to your legislators. I think that's very, very critical. There'll be times, when there's action required. We may need to go to the Capitol when a bill is being heard, make sure that we're there to support those legislators that have gone out on a limb for us. Secondarily, we talked a little bit about the 391 Commission. I'm a big fan. I'm a huge fan. But I also recognize that it's not the end all. It's going to take every bit of this to make it happen. Oh, look at that PCR on the screen back there, promoting it in the sorry. Good. Interesting. Okay. All right. So, and then lastly, legislative affairs. That's primarily what we're focused on is the statewide effort, coordinating all the different counties between here and there, and then also being at the Capitol. We have a lobbyist on staff. We have general counsel on staff. We were involved in drafting some of the bills that were filed. We're going to be supporting them throughout the balance of the legislative session, and we also will be working on draft amendments and substitutions in the individual committees. All right. So our ongoing efforts, like I said, we are volunteers. We have this lobbyist at the Capitol. We have legislation review going on. We have to also make sure that there's not new legislation passed this program, right? So we're also not only working on the legislative, on the opposition side, we're also making sure there's no pro-rail legislation passed. We have legal representation. We're trying to make sure that we can support everybody. One of the things that we're working on is to get some eminent domain training and provide that at no cost to everybody. What we want to do is make sure that everybody between here and there is absolutely educated when we go into this process. We don't want anybody to feel by themselves. It's part of what we're trying to do. Support to our local, state, and elected officials. And it's very critical that through the 391 commissions, through the legislative efforts that we in this region all band together. I mean, the numbers are against us. Y'all know that. There's about 850 to 900,000 people between Houston and Dallas that will be affected. There's 6 million on one end and there's 6 million on the other. So we have a disadvantage. But what we do have, I think, is we have people that are passionate about it. The people on either end are probably not passionate about the rail. They're probably not willing to go out and spend their money and their time to really promote it. So what we have to do is we have to just make sure that we are on the same team, headed the same direction with all the passion that we can muster up to make our voice known. Support of the local community groups is very important. Texas Concerned Citizens, that's one of the things we want to try to do is inform them and arm them with information as it becomes available. You can watch our website, and we will also be, as things come out, we'll be funneling some information out so that it can get disseminated to the individual counties. Speaking around the region on this issue, I'm trying to make sure that everybody hears the same message and understands the worst thing that we can have happen to us right now is to be splintered. They have one voice, they have all the money, and they're going to try to railroad us through this year. And the only way we can do it is if we all stand together. And it's, again, it's a reminder we are volunteers. But like I said, grassroots 391, get you involved. Get online with us. Go to Facebook, Texans Against HSR. I'm not a big Facebook person, but I know that it's a big deal. And I know that we can make our voice heard through that bit of social media. Of course, our website, we have letters of oppositions on there. We have maps on there. We have news articles. And we also have a place to donate. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Reason to support us, we're trying to protect your county and your property values. Again, I'm a volunteer. I'm trying to protect my county and every other county in the middle. Support legislation and your interest in Austin. Again, we're trying to create a one unified voice that we can carry our message. If we all individually were trying to do it, we'd be doing a whole bunch of duplicative efforts, and at the end of the day, we'd all be wasting our time. But together we can make a difference. Working closely with your elected officials. Been in contact with Commissioner Robinson and trying to work every single county in the middle. It's important to note that our chairman is the Grimes County Judge, Ben Lamont, and the Leon County Judge, Byron Ryder, is involved, and we're trying to make sure that our elected officials are standing together with one voice as well. to counter TCR's propaganda in the media in Austin. So region-wide collaboration to oppose the project, media presence, and training. I'll talk a little bit about the training. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, this is the worst part of my presentation because I have to tell you guys, and you know this instinctively, that in order for us to win, we're going to have to spend money. I'm spending my own money. I'm up here on my own dime. I'm volunteering it. I've written a check, and I am spending my time going back and forth to Austin and my money to lobby these efforts. Unfortunately, again, they have money. They have a $10 billion project in front of them. They stand to make a bunch of money off of buying our land through eminent domain for nothing. That's the point. And the only way we're going to make a difference here is if we're going to have to come together. We're going to spend some money. So one of the things that people have asked me is, well, what's the point? How much is it? What are we talking about? We think it's $150,000 a year, 3-year opposition plan. We have 2 legislative sessions we have to go through before the environmental impact statement is probably complete. And during those 2 legislative sessions, we have to do everything we can to pass legislation that limits their abilities and it puts them in a very, very tight box. We have to lobby our governor, the lieutenant governor, and we have to force this issue because a lot of the other rural areas are going to be apathetic. If you're in Midland, for example, you may not really think this is a big deal. You don't need to get involved. Part of what we're trying to do is educate the other representatives up and down Dallas to Austin line, or the Oklahoma City to Monterey, Mexico line, and then also the line we're studying now, which is from Austin to Houston. So we're trying to get everybody together and say, look, we're just on the forefront here, but we need to make sure that we're all together on the opposition of HSR in Texas in general. We're doing these meetings in each county, and all of our funds go directly to the opposition efforts, to the lobbyists, because, again, we're all volunteers. We're just trying to make this happen to protect everybody involved. So we ask, donate. A couple of things I always try to remind everybody: this is a marathon, not a sprint. This is not something we can fix overnight. This is something that's going to take some time. So there will be times in which there's a lull in information, there's a lull in things that are coming out. But don't ever lose sight of the fact that this will take a long time to do. This project isn't good for you. It's not good for me. It's not good for Bell County. It's not good for Trinity County. Just because our goal is not to push it out of these counties into somebody else's county. Our goal is to kill it. Make sure it goes away and doesn't ever come back. And that's why one of our main goals is to change the culture of textile. And thank you for your support. We have a little video I want to show you rolling out here tonight. Take a look at this.
It's not where we want to go.
Sorry about that.
It's not where we want to go. It is where the bank will finance it.
I've been around for about 4 years working in Texas, kind of quietly, fairly quietly. But we have a really good relationship with TxDOT.
Yeah, unlike your California project, there's not a lot in between. It is pretty much open and a little flat.
The Texas Department of Transportation is working very closely with us in helping to expedite this project. Here we're on a 400-passenger 8-car train, largely rural and flight in between full service running every half hour.
We're working very closely with Texas Central, and we're working on a complementary project looking at potentially Dallas to Fort Worth, and looking at doing some service level planning from Austin to Houston. In essence, creating what we kind of call a horseshoe around the state.
There are no grade crossings.
And again, largely rural and flat between us makes it much easier to construct.
Working with TxDOT.
So it's not where we want to go, it is where the bank will finance it. So we have the Japan Bank for International Cooperation. So essentially, they're actually an import bank that is coming in and saying they will guarantee a large portion of the debt. Our first and driving factor is economic issues.
Our partner, one of our partners in the project is the Japan Bank for International Cooperation.
We're very sensitive to some things that drive costs, but most importantly, for your purposes here, is we are driven by what the bank will finance. The Japanese are providing a portion of the debt through JB.
3 or 4 times, I said, but Robert, we don't have any money. He says, no, it's Japanese debt providers. Now you think, why would the Japanese do this? Number one, profit motive.
Primarily the Japan Bank for International Cooperation.
I'm glad you asked that question. I always love the question, how much does it cost for our train? We're a private company, it's going to cost as much as we're going to charge you.
So in terms of acquisition, railroads in Texas do have an ability.
Where's the pushback coming from?
Okay, well, and that is the actual train, by the way. That's the N700 Shinkansen. I want to give thanks to Dr. Nicole Davis for setting all this up for us and working with us. We're very appreciative of that. And of course, Texas Concerned Citizens and how we're working together. We look forward to working with the county. We look forward to working with each and every one of you. If we can help, please let us know. If there's any questions we can answer, we're happy to do so. Again, I ask for your support. This is the terrible part of what I got to do, but we do ask for your help in making this happen so we can stop this project. So, with that being said, I think that's it for me. I'd like to ready to open up for questions. Anybody have any questions? Yes, we'll start with you. I'll get you in a second. Well, do you want to talk about it? What have we heard from the governor and the lieutenant governor? So far, it's been pretty quiet. Both TSCRA, or the cattle raisers, and Farm Bureau have been very quiet, which they have a pretty heavy lobby up there, which I think we can get a little bit more traction through them. As of right now, everybody's kind of playing it safe. And I wish I had more information. Do you have anything else about that? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing. For the record, I believe that there is going to be a stop in Bryan College Station.
That is incorrect. I'm glad you brought that up. They have said that they're going to look at a stop somewhere between Bryan and College Station near Huntsville. The line is not anywhere near Bryan College Station. But at this point, they're not planning on doing it because that'll eat up their 90 minutes.
Oh, I just read that on the website.
Yeah, I understand. You have to read.
Yeah, my question, earlier on, I believe you alluded to, restaurants, hotels, whatnot. I presume you're referring to the workers, the employees that are building this. And I was wondering what the economic impact is actually going to have on the project in terms of all of the people that will be, it's all going to be concrete, it's going to be entire culverts, it's all going to be electrified. How many thousands of jobs are we talking about for people here, not just for the actual construction say no to this project? In other words, if we write a check to contribute to this, how many jobs are we losing by doing this?
Good question, and I'll repeat it for those who are good here. He basically was asking how many jobs are we talking about thwarting, if you will, to stop this project. What I would say to you is they claim that there's 10,000 jobs that'll be done, created through this process. What I would say to you is, I don't think that really matters, and let me tell you why. If they come into your county to build this, they're going to flood your schools, your county governments with all kinds of new workers. They're not going to take your existing workforce. These people are going to be dedicated to build this rail, and they're going to be moving down this field. And so all they're going to do is they're going to be negatively impacting you. Whatever jobs you think will be created, there'll be 3 more jobs that need to be created to deal with the infrastructure that's required. Okay? So I hear your point. I've heard that argument before, but what I hear is the same thing over and over again is what are the ancillary unintended consequences of these new jobs? And what I know is that our schools and our counties are already overtaxed.
We had talked to them up there, and they were explaining to us that it's going to take high-tech training to make this rail, and these people are going to be trained somewhere else. So that tells me that we're lucky if we get 1 or 2 jobs maybe out of it. They're not going to come from here. They're going to recruit them and train them. And then they're going to bring them in and have them build the high-speed rail come through. That was what they told us up at the seminar.
The gypsies that come in here and build this thing and just flood our schools. Yes?
Yeah, man, I'm a property owner, not a lobbyist or anything like that. And I noticed up there you said that you're looking for about $17,500 a year per county for you guys to support this thing. I don't think that's unreasonable, but my question is, what kind of response have you had from other counties when you put their numbers up?
Sure. The question was, what kind of response have I received? It's fairly good. Is it as good as it needs to be? No, it's not. Okay? People are skeptical, admittedly. I understand that. I would be a skeptic. I'm standing up here in front of you as a volunteer, and I'm asking you to help me.
And we're the third county?
This is, I think, the 4th or 5th, actually. We've been in Montgomery, Grimes, Waller, Leon, so that's 4. I know this will be 5. And so we have a lot of support through the internet, and we're seeing some of that. But part of what I'm trying to do is get the message out and then make myself available to answer questions like that, because I understand the skepticism. I do. I really do. Believe me, this is the worst part about what I do. I'm just trying to make a living. All I want to do is move to Leon County, live in the country, and just work a little bit to make a living. And then now I'm trying to work to make a living and come over here and deal with this train. So I personally, and on top of that, fund as much of this as I possibly can as well. So thank you for your question.
I'm going to go back to the question that was just asked about the bringing of new employees into the county to work on this project. As we sat down with the folks up in Arlington and we started talking about technology, I'm a retired aerospace executive. Okay? The high-tech jobs that you're referring to, the engineers, will be in Japan. They will not be here. Japan being the 80% owner of this project, they're going to be the ones controlling it. They're putting in the capital and they're not going to let go of that. It's going to be their engineers, they're using their current designs. There's not new technology for their own statements that's going to be going into this. They're using the current designs, they're using their engineers to manufacture the trains, to manufacture the systems, even down to the rails. When it comes to the United States, those cars that are coming in are going to come in kits, and they're going to be put together like a bicycle kit at Christmas. There's not going to be new technology jobs in Ellis County. Ellis County doesn't have the capability for any of those resources. You may see, if you were, you would see it in Dallas-Fort Worth, companies like Triumph, Lockheed Martin. They have technology people that can build fuselages on the ground. But that business is not coming to the United States. That business is going to Japan. So when you start looking at what jobs are coming here, they're not going to be long-lived. How long is it going to take to be bringing in bulldozers and dirt haulers to manufacture and put in chain link fence and rails? It's not a long-term job. So I'm not even convinced that you're going to see an influx of students in this community. I don't think that you're going to see people renting houses in this community. It will be extremely temporary, under the control and guidance of Japanese. Lady had, yes, sir. I'm sorry. Would you, I thought she had asked a question, but I apologize.
You mentioned briefly that the input from the media and the presence of the media, and you mentioned in social media, but what is the plan to involve the media and at what point would that happen?
The question is, what is the plan to involve the media and when is that going to happen? I know we had, Channel 8 was here for a little while trying to get a few shots for this evening's broadcast. From TCC side, we try to keep our local press involved, and we've been doing pretty well. I think most of you heard about this meeting through our local press. As far as getting other type of media, you've heard about it.
We're going to start a radio campaign here probably next month. We think that because we're mostly rural, we don't think there's really a good TV market. A lot of us have Dish Network or Direct TV, so we're going to be struggling with getting the listeners. We're hoping that the individual radio stations will help us with that. We might can get us to more community level folks, if that makes some sense. Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to try to repeat the question, and then I'll try to cover the things that you articulated very well. The question was, what's going to happen while we're trying to get the infrastructures in place to sustain ourselves to the health service portion of it? How many people are going to die? You asked several questions that are planning type factors. I'm going to go back and I'm going to answer this relative to the 391. Those are questions that should be coming up in a review of the environmental impact statement. Although it says environmental, it isn't just about bugs and weather. Environment includes social environment as well that we're living in. There's financial aspects to it. Those are questions that we shouldn't be trying to speculate and answer to today. That's why it was so important for your communities to bring in this commission, is they can start asking those specific questions and looking at the data that's being used to sell this to the public. So I can't give you an answer. I don't think anyone here can give you that answer now. But that's why it's so important to support this commission and give them the charter to go forward and pull that. Remember the Alamo. Being in Texas, that's what we're really here. It was a battle we lost, but we won the war. So in this, we all have to go forward. And 391 is going to help answer that question.
Okay, just so you know, the Texas Transporter, you remember that big monstrosity of 1,200 feet and high-speed rails and everything else you can imagine. And that was going to take a huge chunk of road for Texas. But what they did was, they started out, I think it was Grimes County with Blackfoot. And he created the first 391, and when he created 391, you are a state agency. And federal law says you shall coordinate with federal and state agencies, and the state law says you shall coordinate with other state agencies. So we will be having an equal seat at the table with these people. What they did was they turned around and environmental impact study came out, and they started shooting holes to it. We already got people researching as we requested information, started shooting holes to it. And Textile went back and changed it illegally. And then they called them back to the parks again and said, hey, that's against the law. We're going to file a lawsuit. They backed out, shut the whole thing down, hit 30 miles. Right, I know that's that whole So that's kind of the strategy they use, and that's some of the strategy we're looking to be able to use here. Because we know for, yeah. Oh, yeah, Gary. Oh. Actually, Gary Bennett was the former president of the executive committee of the North Central Texas Cog in 85 and 86. And I want you all to know that he said, I endorse what you guys are doing. And that means a lot to us because we know that people, powers that be, don't want to. But kudos to him and him and quite a few other people in this room have done a lot to really help us here in Ellis County. But anyway, so that's the strategy we're using, and that's what they did before, and we're going to try to do the same thing again. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet like it's before. Yeah, Gary.
The question was, are we coordinating with Southwest Airlines? The answer is yes, we are. Our lobbyist is Southwest Airlines lobbyist. We picked them for that very reason. And they are currently sitting on the sidelines waiting for there to be the first inkling of taxpayer subsidy. And as soon as there's taxpayer subsidy, then the fight becomes personal, if you will. So good question. It's very important to us. We're monitoring that very closely. And we're doing everything we can to convince them that eminent domain is that taxpayer subsidy that should get them involved. But part of what we're dealing with, and I mentioned this early in my presentation, was there are people, Southwest Airlines being one of them, that believes this is such a pie-in-the-sky project that it will never happen. So we're working very diligently to explain to them that it is if we wait and take that approach, we'll wake up and it will be in front of at our doorstep in this room. So good question. Yes. Is there a South Texas call? It's here. I think it's Harris County or Galveston. Yes, there is. Montgomery County is working on their 391 right now. They're hoping to pass it. We already have one in Waller County, Grimes County, Leon County. So we're working our way through getting the 391s up. And I'll say this again, that is part of the strategy. It cannot and will not be the silver bullet, I promise you. It just won't be. It seems enticing. Believe me, I'm on a commission. I get that. But it's only a part of the strategy. So, did you have one over here? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. What is the timeline for the environmental impact? Our understanding is that the draft EIS is supposed to come out in the next few months, and then we'll have, I think it's another 18 months past that before we get the final one out. But a lot of that's going to depend on the 391 Commission and what we do with the state capital. Because if the 391 Commission starts running in circles and the state legislators do the same thing, that time can increase. And that's part of what we're trying to accomplish, is to increase their time on that. So, good question. Yes, ma'am? Good question. Our organization is focused on high-speed rail in the entire state of Texas. The reason why we're currently focused on this project is because it's the most imminent. That's it. Like I said before, our goal is to change the culture in TxDOT so that they don't ever try to do this again. And to expand on that a little bit, recently, within the last year and a half, they hired a new rail director. The Railroad Commission sent the rail division, if you will, and sent them over to TxDOT to be under TxDOT, and they went out and hired a guy, and and he is a high-speed rail guy. So one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to get him reassigned to something a little bit less productive.
Also, part of the reason why we are focusing on Ellis County right now, we live in Ellis County. We started our activity as Texas Concerned Citizens here in Ellis County. But as he said, the most imminent is this particular corridor. In my presentation, I talked about we're going to take what we've learned and communicate that to the cities of Red Oak, Villa, Glen Heights, and Waxahachie. We've had favorable response from the commissioners in the county. And we're going to go forward with what we've learned to try to extend this. Because as I said, Ellis County is critical because both those railways run right through Ellis County. And if we're successful in working with this 391, is what Hal's been talking about, which I believe we will be, then we're going to do a good thing in standing up and I would say take the bullets first. Be the first pioneer, but it's critical for us to succeed. That's why we started. Yes, sir.
So if this thing goes through, they come through my property, an active domain on 200 feet of my property. Does that mean market value?
Yeah, that's the question is, if it comes through and they invoke eminent domain, what does that look like for me? There's a twofold answer there. Number one, it's not entirely set because that's one of the areas that we're working on the legislation to address. And what we're trying to do is get that to where it's 2 times market value, not market value. But the real damage is done to the collateral, to the balance of the property. You're going to get paid for 200 foot times whatever your length is. Okay, but you have to go in there and you have to be educated and say, well, but you also destroyed the balance of my property on either side, and the use of that property is now, the value of it's gone way down, and then my neighbors have gone way down, and get them involved. So it's going to be, this is different than a power line or a tap or a gas line. And that's one of the things I try to explain to people, is this is significantly different. It's going to not only affect you, but it's going to affect your neighbor. Because you're going to hear this thing. You heard how loud it is. I didn't add any volume to that. That's when you're standing right there by that. Got right off of YouTube. It's exactly what it's going to sound like when it goes flying by your house. And so if you're within 1,000 feet of this thing, you're going to hear it. If you're within 1,000 feet of this thing, we may have to deal with some firearm restrictions. That's one thing that hadn't even been brought up tonight. That's what listen. That was brought up big time in a lot of the middle counties because they're like, wait a minute, will this train, is it going to be bulletproof? Right? I mean, it's bullet trains going to be bulletproof. This is a silly question, but where we're at, a lot of the land value is based on its hunting value. But people can use it to hunt and to fish and those kind of things. What's the effect going to be on our ancillary properties if we can't get that close? Yes, sir.
Can everyone hear Gary Bennett? All right. Gary, this is an important topic for everybody, so I hate to do this to you, but I'm going to ask you to repeat it. They could not hear you back.
Well, the process that's going to happen on this would be that the committee, there's going to be a board of commissioners that's going to make a determination about what that property is being taken directly from the right-of-way is going to be worth, and they're going to make an award to you. Now, they may also consider the fact that if your property is cut in two, you can no longer access the other side of your property, such as farmland, then they're going to try to award you damages based upon the loss of the use of that property to you. But there are a lot of factors that come into that, such as even, quite frankly, emotional distress. The families that have had property in their families for generations can no longer use it. What it's also stating is that there are properties in this county that are going to line up in between the two rail lines. And if they only allow the access points that they're talking about, then you may not even be able to no longer get to your property or out of the property, so you're going to lose the entire value of that land. And you'll have to be compensated, but that rail line may be a mile from you or half a mile from you. It's going to take that property. But the process will be that if you're not satisfied with the award of commissioners, then you'll file a petition in court. You'll have to present your own witnesses coming in for what that value is that you've lost and get additional compensation through that award. That's going to be the process that the law provides in an eminent domain proceeding. So it's a drawn-out process, and there's a lot of factors that will come into play and make a determination about what your damages are. My concern is that because this is a private corporation, they're looking at maximizing their profit margins. So they're not going to be willing to come in and give you a whole lot of money for what they're taking. And you really need to be thinking about that if this project goes forward.
Thank you. I'd also comment that if you're watching the news and what's happening out in California, they're a good example to watch of what not to do. But you also see that they're going through this exact same problem right now about eminent domain. And it just so happens where they were supposed to have 535, I believe, sections of land already under control, they've only had 125, and the rest of them have been challenging the values in court. And it has just lengthened this whole process. And recently they've gone from a $10 billion projection in cost to $68 billion in cost. So, there's things to be learned. I'm also going to make a plug here for Kyle. One of the things that he had on his chart, he talked about, was the training for eminent domain. So you need to keep up with what they're doing on their website, because as it gets closer, I'm sure we're going to be inviting him back to say, let's have a session to train everybody about what to look for, what are the pitfalls, and we don't want you to be alone. We need to learn from each other. That's the basic of, I think, this message. Another question? Lady in the back.
I have a couple.
Sorry.
You mentioned that the 391 right now that's passing through a couple of towns, but it needs to be a county-wide issue, is that correct? And if so, how do we, people who are more directly affected with this, promote that being done in our county? And then also speaking to that, how do we, the people who are directly affected, get our neighbors who don't feel, I feel like a lot of people feel like, well, the train's not coming through my property, so I don't care so much. So how do we, on a local level, besides radio support, get the word out to our neighbors and our county?
The last part is how do we, as a group, get the word out about the 391s? And I think the question was, what about getting the whole county involved? And that becomes a strategy that needs to be worked out. And I've been discussing what I call the crow and blackbird approach. We need lots of little blackbirds on this crow to drive them out of town. And what we're talking about doing here with Palmer and Ennis and Ferris, that's one blackbird. We have opportunities to go teach on the 391 other areas within the county and outside the county. We're also looking at Corsicana, Fairfield, and all the communities, the smaller communities. It takes 2 municipal governments as a minimum and or a county to form one of these commissions. So if you just look at the county, then that's one that makes everything in the county. Whereas if you have 2, you can attack it from 2 different angles at the same time. Did I answer your question?
And then I think it's a good point. we do need you to do, we have extra brochures here for you. If you can share those with your neighbors, we'll be glad to forward them our Facebook and information on our website. That'll help as well. The main thing is to let them know, like I tried to articulate to you tonight, that A, this is a reality that we have to deal with, and B, there is something you can do about it, and C, that your property values are going down, if not already down, as a result of it. You have to understand that, and even if they're not, and the other thing, I mentioned this briefly, these lines on these maps are very schematic. Just because you're not in the path of what this appears to be the line right now does not mean you will not be in the path later on. Because they have to straighten it out, they're going to have to dodge wetlands, they're going to have to dodge structures, and so they're going to be looking for the straightest path that has the least amount of contour to it. So just keep in mind that it's very schematic. So that's one of the things that needs to be shared with other folks that currently don't believe that it's impacting them, that it will impact. It will impact. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Good question. Is there any teeth to House Bill 1889? And that was filed by Will Metcalf. The answer is yes. If that bill passes, then every time they cross a county road, they will have to get permission from the county. Now, you and I know that they can't make it through any of these counties without crossing at least one county road. And the idea is that they have to, even if they go over it, they still have to get approval. Not just if they try to close it or anything else. It's really if they cross it. So we absolutely need to support Will Metcalf on this bill. It is imperative, that is, if there is a silver bullet, okay, if there is one, that's as close as we can get, I think. Because we know there's, I think, 7 or 8 of the counties between Dallas and Houston have already filed resolutions against the project. All we have to have is really one county that says no. Not only no, but you need to take it and go home. So if there's more, if there's 9, then they know it's terminal. And that's why they've come out, some of you may have seen it, they've come out recently and tried to attack Representative Metcalf because they know this bill is effective. It will solve the problem. Just because it's a good drug. That's a very good question. Anybody else? Yes, sir. That I don't know about that. I don't know. That's something that
we got our information from the North Central Texas Cog at a meeting with the Federal Railroad Association.